Imagine you just started a new RPG. Big open world, hundreds of hours of content. And right at the beginning, the game gives you a skill tree. Dozens of abilities arranged in branches. Some are grayed out, some are glowing. And there's a tooltip on every locked skill that says, requires level 1 first. Now imagine you ignore all of that. You skip straight to the shiny level 5 abilities at the top of the tree. You dump every single skill point you have into the most exciting sounding stuff, something called arcane obliteration, another one called shadow market dominance. Sounds incredible. You hit confirm, and then you walk outside and get absolutely destroyed by the first enemy in the tutorial zone, a goblin, a small one, because you skipped the prerequisites. You never unlocked the foundational skills that make the advanced ones actually work. You had the points, you had the ambition, you just did it in the wrong order. This is exactly what most people do with their money, and it is costing them, on average, decades of compounding growth. There is a specific sequence for building wealth, a skill tree for your finances, and the single most important investing rule that nobody ever leads with is this: complete the levels in order. Never skip one.
My name is AFK Sebas, and I focus on the mechanics of wealth building. Why some people make steady, compounding progress while others seem to put in the same effort and go nowhere. If you've ever felt like you're doing everything right financially and still not getting where you want to be as fast as you expected, this video was built specifically for you. By the end of this, you'll have the complete investing skill tree, every level, the exact order, the math behind why skipping even one of them is so expensive, and the specific boss battle that each level throws at you to knock you off the path. Hit subscribe and leave a like if this helps things click. It tells the algorithm this is worth putting in front of people who actually need it.
Here's a scenario that is more common than anyone admits. Someone opens a brokerage account in their late 20s. They've been reading about investing online. They're excited. They transfer $200 a month into it and start buying individual stocks because they read a few articles about specific companies and feel genuinely good about their reasoning. Meanwhile, at their job, there's a 401k plan with a 4% employer match that they enrolled in at 1% contributions because they were worried about their take-home pay. So every month, they are leaving free money on the table at work while voluntarily putting money into a taxable account where every gain is subject to capital gains tax. Also, meanwhile, they have $4,800 on a credit card at 22% APR that they've been carrying for 2 years because it felt more important to invest than to pay off debt. The math on that, by the way, is not close. It is not even in the same category. The market would need to return 22% annually, consistently, for that to be a reasonable trade. It has never done that consistently. And when the market dips 15% for a few months, which it does, routinely, normally, it's just a Tuesday, they panic sell part of their portfolio to cover an unexpected car repair because they never built an emergency fund. So now they've also locked in a loss on investments they would have recovered if they just left them alone. Every single one of those decisions was made by someone who was genuinely trying, someone who had read about investing, who cared about their financial future, who was doing something rather than nothing. They just did it in the wrong order. And the cost of that wrong order, compounded over 30 years, is not a rounding error. It is the difference between financial security and wondering why the math never seemed to work out.
Here's what the entire personal finance industry gets wrong, or at least dramatically underemphasizes. The conversation is almost always about what to invest in. Stocks versus bonds, index funds versus active management, Roth IRA versus traditional, real estate versus the market, growth versus value, domestic versus international. The debate is endless, passionate, and largely missing the point. Because the single biggest variable in your investing outcome isn't which vehicle you choose, it's the order in which you fill them. Think about that. The sequence of your investing decisions creates more or less return than the specific investments themselves, at least in the early and middle stages of wealth building. Because some financial moves have guaranteed, immediate, mathematically certain returns, and some have probable but uncertain future returns, and the only logical thing to do is to exhaust the guaranteed ones first. Your employer match is a 50 to 100% instant return on every dollar guaranteed the moment you contribute. No market in history has ever reliably beaten that. You cannot beat free money. And yet a significant percentage of people with access to an employer match are not capturing all of it. Paying off a 20% APR credit card is a guaranteed 20% return on every dollar you put toward it. Show me a consistent 20% return in the market. I'll wait. You cannot outinvest high-interest debt. The math is not ambiguous. But most investing content skips this entirely and goes straight to arguing about Roth versus traditional, because that's a more interesting debate and gets more clicks. The boring truth is that you should not be having that debate until you've already done the less glamorous stuff first. This is the skill tree, and it matters more than almost anything else you'll read about investing.
Let's talk about why this information is so consistently buried in mainstream financial content. Personal finance YouTube, personal finance Reddit, personal finance podcasts. Almost all of it is organized around products and strategies. How do I pick stocks? Should I use a robo-advisor? Is now a good time to buy real estate? These are genuinely useful topics, but they all assume you've already completed the foundational levels. They don't say that out loud. They just skip the tutorial and go straight to endgame content, which leaves a large percentage of the audience applying advanced tactics to a broken foundation. It's the equivalent of a cooking channel that does nothing but molecular gastronomy techniques, aimed at an audience that hasn't learned how to properly hold a knife yet. The advanced content isn't wrong, it's just being served to the wrong level. There's also a less charitable explanation. The foundational steps of the investing skill tree are almost entirely free to implement. Max your employer match, pay off high-interest debt, build an emergency fund in a high-yield savings account, contribute to a Roth IRA, buy index funds. None of this requires a financial advisor's ongoing 1% annual fee. None of it requires a premium subscription. None of it generates affiliate income. So the financial content ecosystem has a structural incentive to skip past the boring, free foundational stuff and focus on the complex, differentiatable, monetizable stuff, which means the people who need the foundational content most are the least likely to find it presented clearly. There's one more reason the order of operations gets ignored, and this one is behavioral. The foundational steps feel like chores. Pay off debt, build a cash cushion, contribute to your employer plan. None of that feels like investing. It doesn't feel like you're in the game yet. The dopamine hit of opening a brokerage account and watching individual stocks move is much more engaging than quietly paying down a credit card. But engagement is not the metric. Outcome is the metric. The game rewards completing levels in order, not playing the most exciting level first. Okay, here's the actual skill tree. I'm going to go through every level, explain exactly what it does, why it comes where it does, and show you the math that makes the order non-negotiable. Level 1. Capture the full employer match. This is the first skill you unlock, and it is mandatory before anything else. If your employer offers a 401k match, and most medium to large employers do, your first financial priority is to contribute exactly enough to capture 100% of it. Here's why this is non-negotiable. A typical employer match is 50 cents on every dollar up to 6% of your salary. That is a guaranteed 50% return on those dollars before they've been invested in anything. If you make $60,000 a year and you contribute 6%, that's $3,600 from you and $1,800 from your employer every single year. $1,800 that disappears if you contribute 5% instead of 6%. Over 30 years, that $1,800 a year invested in compounding at a conservative 7% grows to roughly $170,000. That is $170,000 that people are leaving on the table because they enrolled at 3% instead of 6% and never updated it. The employer match is also the only investment in the world that gives you a guaranteed 50 to 100% return the instant you make it. Nothing else you will ever do in investing has a guaranteed return anywhere near that. You complete level 1 before you do anything else. Full stop. Level 2. Eliminate high-interest debt. Once you're capturing the full match, level 2 is paying off any debt above roughly 7% interest. This threshold exists because the historical average annual return of the U.S. stock market is around 7 to 10%, depending on the period you measure. If your debt costs more than your expected investment return, paying it off is the better investment. Credit cards in the U.S. currently average somewhere between 20 and 25% APR.
Paying off a 22% credit card is the equivalent of finding an investment with a guaranteed 22% annual return. You cannot find that. It does not exist at that reliability and consistency. The math people use to justify carrying high-interest debt while investing goes like this. The market returns 10% historically, my debt costs 22%, but I can handle the minimum payments and I want to be in the market. What this math ignores is that the 10% is uncertain, and the 22% is happening every single month, compounding on whatever balance you haven't paid off. High-interest debt is the enemy of compounding. It is running a compounding engine in reverse on your behalf, and you are funding it. There is one nuance worth mentioning. Low-interest debt, mortgages, federal student loans at 4 to 5%, car loans near the prime rate, these are different. You do not need to pay these off before investing. The expected return on your investments exceeds the guaranteed cost of the debt. That math favors investing. But high-interest consumer debt is level 2. You clear it before you advance. Level 3. Build the emergency fund. This is the level most people understand conceptually and then skip anyway, and it is the one that does the most quiet, invisible damage over time. 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses in a high-yield savings account, liquid, accessible without penalty. That's the level requirement. Here's why this level exists in the skill tree and why it specifically comes before you start investing aggressively. Your investment accounts need time. Compound interest is a long game, and the biggest enemy of compound interest is being forced to sell at the wrong moment. Without an emergency fund, your investment account becomes your de facto emergency fund, and that means that the moment life hands you an expensive problem, and it will, you are selling investments to cover it. If that emergency arrives during a market downturn, which emergency seems specifically designed to do, you are selling at a loss and permanently removing that money from its compound growth trajectory. The recovery you would have experienced if you just waited it out simply doesn't happen because the money is gone. The emergency fund is the shield skill in the skill tree. It doesn't generate flashy numbers by itself. It protects all the other skills from being interrupted at the worst possible time. And practically speaking, a high-yield savings account right now is paying somewhere in the 45% range. Your emergency fund earns something reasonable while it sits there. It is not dead money. It is load-bearing money. Level 4. Maximize tax-advantaged accounts. This is where the game gets genuinely interesting because level 4 is where you unlock the most powerful passive wealth-building mechanics available to regular people. The Roth IRA and the 401k beyond your match are tax-advantaged accounts. Depending on which type you use, traditional or Roth, you either get a tax deduction now or tax-free growth forever. Both are dramatically better than a taxable brokerage account where every dividend and every gain is a taxable event. The math of tax-advantaged investing over 30 years versus taxable investing is not a small difference. Assuming the same underlying investments, the same returns, the same contributions, the Roth IRA wins by tens of thousands of dollars at minimum and by 6 figures over a full career, purely because the gains were never taxed along the way. The 2024 Roth IRA contribution limit is $7,000 per year for people under 50. That's $587 a month. The 401k contribution limit is $23,000 per year beyond what your employer contributes. You don't need to max both immediately. You just need to be filling these before you're putting money into a taxable brokerage account. The specific question of Roth versus traditional is worth its own video, with short version. If you're early in your career and expect to be in a higher tax bracket later, Roth wins. If you're in your peak earning years and expect to be in a lower bracket in retirement, traditional wins. When in doubt, Roth is a reasonable default for most people because tax-free growth in retirement is a powerful ecosystem to have. The index fund conversation also lives here. Inside your Roth IRA or 401k, most people are best served by low-cost broad market index funds, not because they're exciting, they're not, but because they track the overall market, charge almost nothing in fees, and have historically outperformed the majority of actively managed funds over long time horizons. The data on this is not subtle. Level 5. Taxable brokerage plus additional investing. You have reached level 5. You are capturing the full employer match. You have no high-interest debt. You have 3 to 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account. You are contributing to at least one tax-advantaged account. Now you open the taxable brokerage account. This is where most investing content starts. It assumes you've already done everything above it. If you have, great, you're ready for this level, and it will work. If you haven't, you are applying an advanced skill to a broken foundation, and the results will be slower and more fragile than they should be. In a taxable brokerage, you invest in the same broad index funds you use in your tax-advantaged accounts. You continue dollar cost averaging, which just means investing a fixed amount at regular intervals regardless of what the market is doing, and you do not touch it. You let compound interest do what it was always going to do, which is compound. This is also the level where you might start exploring additional strategies. Real estate, individual stocks if you genuinely enjoy the research, alternative assets. These are not forbidden here. They're just specific skills within level 5 that require their own prerequisites, and they don't change the order of the levels below them.
Here's something most financial content doesn't describe because it's not about numbers. It's about the actual lived experience of completing each level. Level 1 feels almost anticlimactic. You log into your HR portal, change your 401k contribution percentage from 3% to 6%, and your take-home pay drops by maybe $60 a month. That's it. No fanfare. But somewhere in a spreadsheet you'll never see, your employer just committed to putting $1,800 a year into your future, and that number is already compounding. Level 2 is the uncomfortable one. Paying off debt feels like running backward. You're not building anything, you're just dismantling something that was quietly eating your future. The month you make the final payment on a credit card and cancel it, you will feel a specific kind of relief that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. It's the sound of an engine that was running in reverse finally stopping. Level 3 is the one that pays off in a moment you won't predict. For most people, it's about 14 months in. The transmission goes on the car, or the roof needs an emergency repair, or there's a medical bill that insurance didn't cover the way you thought it would. And instead of the familiar cold panic of opening your banking app and doing the math on which bill can wait, you just transfer the money from one account to another. You handle it, and then you refill the emergency fund over the next few months and move on. That moment, the moment the emergency fund actually works, is when people become permanent converts. Levels 4 and 5 are where the math starts doing something that feels surreal. You check your investment account after a few years and notice that it gained more in a single month than you contributed that month. And then it happens again and again. And at some point, the account is generating returns that are larger than your contributions. This is the moment compound interest stops being a concept you understand intellectually and becomes something you understand viscerally. You are no longer just saving money. Your money is working, and it is working harder than you are.
Every level in the skill tree has a boss, a psychological trap that appears at exactly the right moment to knock you off the path. You need to know what they look like before you meet them. Level 1 boss, the enrollment delay. This boss appears as a small act of procrastination. You join a new job. HR sends you the benefits enrollment packet. You set it aside because you're busy. You tell yourself you'll handle it next week. Then it's 3 months later and you still haven't enrolled. The Level 1 boss doesn't attack you. It just waits. Every month you delay capturing the employer match is a month of free money permanently gone. There is no retroactive capture. You cannot go back and claim the match from months you didn't contribute. The boss wins quietly and invisibly. The counter is simple. Treat 401k enrollment like a bill that is due on your first day of employment, because in a real sense, it is. Failing to complete this task costs you real money every single month you delay it. Level 2 boss, the investment math rationalization. This is the boss that sounds like it's on your side. It appears as a reasonable sounding argument. The market returns 10% historically. My credit card charges 18%, but the minimum payments are manageable, and I want to be invested now rather than waiting. The problem is that this math only works if your 10% return is guaranteed, which it isn't, and your 18% debt cost is negotiable, which it isn't. You are comparing a certain cost to an uncertain gain and betting that the uncertain gain is bigger. Over long periods, the market probably does win against low-interest debt. Against high-interest debt, it almost never does. The other version of this boss is the FOMO version. The market is doing really well right now, and I don't want to miss the run-up. The market runs up and corrects constantly. High-interest debt compounds constantly. One of those is certain. Prioritize the certain one. Level 3 boss, the impatience of dead money. This boss shows up about 8 months into building your emergency fund. You have $6,000 sitting in a savings account. You watch the market go up. Every day you check and see that your emergency fund gained $1.80 in interest, while an S&P 500 index fund went up $43. You start thinking, this money is just sitting here doing almost nothing. I should be investing it. This thinking is precisely backwards. Your emergency fund is not sitting there doing nothing. It is sitting there doing the most important thing it could possibly do, which is ensuring that your investment accounts never get interrupted. The moment you cannibalize your emergency fund for investments, you have unequipped your shield. You are now one expensive problem away from being forced to sell investments at a bad time. Keep the shield equipped. The 4% on your high-yield savings account is fine. The insurance value of the emergency fund is worth multiples of that. Level 4 boss, analysis paralysis. This boss is particularly effective because it disguises itself as responsible research. You want to understand the Roth versus traditional decision before you commit. You read 12 articles. They all say it depends. You listen to 3 podcast episodes. They all say different things. You decide to wait until you fully understand it before you start contributing. Meanwhile, you are in your 30s, and every year of waiting costs you more in lost compound growth than any Roth versus traditional optimization could gain you. The counter is to make a good enough decision today rather than a perfect decision in 6 months.
For most people under 40 who aren't in an unusually high tax bracket, the Roth IRA is a sensible default. Open the account, pick a total market index fund, set up automatic monthly contributions. Optimize later. The cost of starting imperfectly is almost always smaller than the cost of not starting. Level 5 Boss, the overconfidence upgrade. You've made it to level 5. You've done everything right. Your financial foundation is solid. Your tax advantage accounts are funded. Your investments have been compounding for a few years, and the number is large enough to be genuinely exciting. And then the level 5 boss arrives. It sounds like this. You've clearly figured this out. The boring index fund approach got you here, but now that you have a real base, maybe it's time to get a little more sophisticated. Maybe some individual stocks, maybe a REIT, maybe some crypto allocation. After all, you can afford to take some risk now. The cruelty of this boss is that it attacks you with your own success. It uses your confidence against you. The counter is not to never explore additional strategies. It's to do it with a portion of your portfolio that you have explicitly designated as your learning budget. Maybe 5 or 10% of your taxable brokerage goes into your more active experimental picks. The rest stays boring. The skill tree built your wealth. Don't uninstall it because you got cut of the game.
Let me take you back to the beginning for a second. The goblin that killed you in the tutorial zone, the one you never saw coming because you skipped straight to the advanced skills. In retrospect, that goblin was always going to be there. The game wasn't unfair. You just didn't read the skill tree. Here's the thing about financial skill trees that separates them from video games. In a game, dying to the tutorial goblin costs you 10 minutes and your pride. In your financial life, skipping levels costs you compounding years that you cannot recover. The math is not forgiving on that front. 10 years of compound growth is not something you can buy back later with extra contributions. Time is the variable that cannot be replaced. But here's what is hopeful, genuinely, not in a false optimism kind of way. The skill tree is not complicated. It doesn't require a financial advisor to navigate. It doesn't require you to understand options or leverage or alternative assets. It requires 5 sequential decisions that, once made and automated, run largely in the background. Capture the full employer match. Clear the high-interest debt. Build the emergency fund. Fill the tax-advantaged accounts. Then invest the rest. That's it. That is the rule. 5 levels, one at a time, in order. The people who build real wealth over the course of a career aren't the people who found the most sophisticated investment strategy. They're the ones who completed the boring prerequisites that made the sophisticated strategy work. They're the ones who read the skill tree. In the video game analogy, there's a name for those players. They're the ones who show up at the end game with a fully maxed character and gear that took years to build. And they got there not because they skipped the grind, but because they did the grind in the right order at the right time, without getting distracted by builds that looked more exciting but required a foundation they hadn't built yet. Your financial life is the longest game you will ever play. The mechanic that wins it isn't excitement, it's sequence.
If this video reframed how you think about the order of your financial decisions, hit subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely matters for getting this in front of people who need it.